This is another preview, sort of overview video of a chunk of book one. I really take my time in the beginning of books like this when I teach them to students because I think if you just do a really deliberate job early on with difficult books, it can help the new reader condition their reading experience and sort of get used to the new way of looking at the book. This is like nothing else. And the beginning of book one is just breathtaking. So we looked at the invocation last time, and I'd like to look at the first about 300 lines. And I call this presentation Better to Reign in Hell Than Serve in Heaven. So my approach to these preview videos for Paradise Lost will be as follows. I'll summarize the lines we're going over. And, I don't think it's a big deal to have spoilers. The point of epic poetry is not suspense. We know the story of the fallen angels and of Jesus' redemption, of Adam and Eve's fall. None of that will be surprising. There'll be numerous surprising moments, but the plot will not be surprising. And I think for the first time reader, knowing basically what's going to happen in a book is actually really helpful. It anchors us. Secondly, I want to reflect on a passage that I feel is obviously significant. Third, I want to reflect on a subtle and easy to miss passage. Fourth, I want to point out an amazing little detail, word, or line, which there are so many here, but I think it's helpful to just take your time and look closely every once in a while. And fifth, I'm going to make some suggestions for further consideration or journaling questions, discussion points. And that's good if you're teaching this poem, feel free to use those. If you want to keep a journal, feel free to use those. If you're leading a discussion group at a library or an adult book group, these may be helpful. I begin each class reading the first 26 lines of the poem with my students. I like them to have those by heart by the end of our experience. Okay, so here's the summary. And what I would do if I was reading this for the first time is I would have book one open, and I would put little brackets around each of these sections, and I would write what I have here outside of the brackets. In other words, from line 84 to 124, those 40 lines, we get Satan's first words. So I would put a bracket there and just write Satan's first words. The reason I'm suggesting this, and I do this with the Odyssey as well, is sometimes it's just really helpful to know when there's speaking and who's talking, just the basic architecture of the book. Secondly, 183 to 191, there's a planned demonic meeting, a meeting of the demons in hell. Something we'll talk about in a minute, line 192 to 208 is a really fascinating description of Satan's body. 242 to 270 is what I call satanic epistemology and ethics. Epistemology is the philosophy of how we know things. Handy word. 283 to 311. Again, you can pause this video. I would do brackets and write these things in your book. It's just going to help you read and not be confused. 283 to 311. Satan's shield, spear, and legions. Amazing descriptions here. Think of the job Milton has. And then 311 to 330, Satan actually calls forth his legions. So if you need to pause the video and write these things in, I just really recommend it. Okay, here's my obviously significant passage. I love this. We get a sort of soliloquy by Satan, and lots of ink has been spilled, and I'll talk about it, but there's a reason I read Paradise Lost after Shakespeare, and I've done it in the past after Othello, and now I'm doing it after Hamlet. But I think something that makes Milton different than other epic writers is Milton is an epic poet who has internalized and read Shakespeare. So it's not only the huge epic landscape and huge epic journeys and huge epic descriptions, which we're used to from writers like Homer, but it's also that Shakespearean interiority of characters, that these characters have deep inner lives, and they occasionally have moments where they're alone and they think through things and ask questions and contemplate. So here we go. Satan's alone. Pay really close attention in Shakespeare and in Milton. Who are these people when they're alone? Who are these people when they're talking in public? He's alone here in hell. And we know that Satan was Lucifer. We get this story. Satan was Lucifer in heaven, bearer of light. And he gets a third of the angels in heaven to rebel against God. And we get more on this later. They lose, shocker. Hard to beat God. and they get sent to hell. And this seems kind of new, and Satan's sort of processing this out loud. Feels very Shakespearean, and I've bold-faced and underlined things that I think are interesting. He starts, "Is this the region, this the soil, the clime," said the lost archangel, "this the seat that we must change for heaven, this mournful gloom for that celestial light?" Begins with a kind of a Shakespearean question. We can almost feel to be or not to be. That is the question here. "Be it so." And then he doesn't fight it. He just says, "Yeah, it is. This is where we are now." He continues, "Since he who now is sovereign," again, Milton was anti-monarchy, so when he uses words like sovereign and king, those aren't positive words. "Since he who now is sovereign, God, can dispose and bid what shall be right, farthest from him is best, whom reason hath equaled, force hath made supreme above his equals." So Satan says, I had every reason to fight God, but the problem is God has more force, so he won. It was a might makes right situation. And then he shifts gears, realizing that he is where he is irrevocably. And he says, "Farewell, happy fields, where joy forever dwells." That's heaven. "Hail, horrors. Hail, infernal world, and thou profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor." He actually addresses hell as a place, right? And then he goes from saying, "Hell, welcome me," and then he explains to hell itself and us indirectly who he is. So who is he? "One who brings a mind not to be changed by place or time." The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. It seems very noble, doesn't it, that Satan's internal strength and strength of mind can actually change the geography of where he is into something positive. In Act 3 of Julius Caesar, but right before he gets killed, a Roman pleads with him to free his brother who's been banished. And Caesar says, "I have a mind as fixed as the northern star," and he's constant, and that scene is really positive. Not sure if it is. We also know in Hamlet, I believe it's in Act 3, where his college buddies visit him to see what's wrong. They're spying on him, actually. And Hamlet says, "What sends you to prison here?" And they're looking at Hamlet like, "You're a prince. What's wrong? You're not in a prison." He said, "To me, it's in a prison. To me, it's a prison. There is nothing good or bad, but thinking makes it so." So this is kind of a modern cutting-edge thought that you can create your own reality in your mind. An ancient or medieval poem would never say this. So Satan says to hell, who you're getting now is someone who cannot be changed by place or time. I'm still me. Doesn't matter that I'm here, because the mind is its own place, and it itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. That's worth contemplating and talking about, certainly. And then he goes on. So that's like a satanic belief, right? What matter where? What does it matter where I am geographically? If I be still the same in what I should be, all but less than he whom thunder hath made greater. Another question. And he doesn't really answer that. He said, "Here at least we shall be free." And there again is like a satanic philosophy that freedom trumps everything else. Personal freedom. And it's very Miltonic as well. "The Almighty has not built here for his envy, will not drive us hence." Almighty's not going to kick us out of hell. He created this for us. "Here in hell, we may reign," interesting word, "secure." And in my choice, to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. And then maybe the most famous line of the poem, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." So what we're seeing is Satan believing he can create his own reality, Satan prioritizing freedom above all else. And then here we get maybe the deepest core of Satan, which is a hatred of obedience and a priority of power. And then he says, "But wherefore? But why let we then, our faithful friends, the associates and co-partners of our loss," the other demons, weird way of saying that. associates and co-partners. It makes it sound like they're like a law firm or something. Um, why do we let them lie thus astonished on the oblivious pool, and call them not to share with us their part in this unhappy mansion, or once more with rallied arms to try what may be yet regained in heaven, or what more lost in hell? So he concludes, we get a really interesting exploration um, of Satan realizing his predicament, um, making statements about the fact that God only defeated him by force, not by reason. And then he addresses hell. And then he says basically how he sees the world and how he can create his own world. His great priority over personal freedom above all else. His great priority over power versus obedience. And then he is planning on addressing the other fallen angels who are around him and discussing what can be done. It's a just fascinating internal exploration of the poem's most interesting character, I think. Here's a subtle, easy to miss passage, and it's the poem's first epic simile. If you have experience with the Iliad or the Odyssey, the Homeric or epic simile is just a fascinating component, and it's the sort of thing that new readers would skip over because it seems unnecessary. If a character's shield is big, I get it. It's a big shield. The fact that you're comparing it to all these other things is not interesting. But you're going to notice there's all kinds of layered meaning, and Milton's always working on you. So these lines, starting on line 192, is just Satan's body and how Milton describes it. Okay. Thus, Satan, talking to his nearest mate, who's Beelzebub, with head uplift above the wave and eyes that sparkled blazed, his other parts beside, prone on the flood, extended long and large, lay, floating many a rood, in bulk as... Okay, encircle the word as there and write ES in the margin, epic simile, because here it comes. So what the poet's saying is, here's how big Satan's body is. As huge as whom the fables name of monstrous size, Titanian or earthborn, that warred on Jove, Briareus or Typhon, whom the den by ancient Tarsus held, or that sea beast Leviathan. I'm going to explain these allusions in a second, but I'm just reading through. So Briareus is a particular mythological creature. Typhon is a particular mythological creature. And then Leviathan is from the Old Testament, which God of all his works created hugest that swim the ocean stream. Him happily slumbering on the Norway foam, the pilot of some small night-foundered boat or skiff, deeming some island, oft, as seamen tell, with fixed anchor in his scarely rind, moors by his side, under the lee, while night invests the sea in wished morn delays. Oh my gosh, what just happened? We went from, he's as big as this creature, Briareus, this creature, Typhon, he's bigger than Leviathan from the Bible, and then we get this weird exploration of like, he's so big that a Norwegian pilot on a boat would confuse Satan for an island. So here are these allusions and sort of what they mean. And I got this from this Atheoid Greek mythology website, which I find to be really good. Briareus, primordial 100-headed, 50-headed storm giant, because of course. More specifically, a god of sea storms, and in this guise he was often named Aegeon. Briareus married Poseidon's daughter and dwelled with her in the depths of the sea. His two brothers were appointed guardians of the gates of the storm pit Tartarus. Briareus' name was derived from the Greek word brairos, meaning stout or strong. So 50 heads, 100 hands, and led to the anarchy in the ocean. Okay, fine. I get it. So this is just, if you're looking to compare Satan to a big mythological creature, this would be one of them. Typhon is the other one. This is a winged giant so huge that it was said that his head brushed the stars. I love that. Man-shaped from the waist up, 2 coiled serpents in place of legs, 100 serpent heads for fingers, filthy matted beard, pointed ears, and eyes flashing fire. According to some, he had 200 hands consisting of 50 serpent-headed fingers on each hand and 100 heads proper. One was human, the other 99 bestial. As a volcano demon, that's a heavy metal band name right there, Typhus hurled red-hot rocks at heaven. Okay, so another humongous, sort of physically complicated character. But here we have that element of fighting heaven. So that's really interesting. And then we get Leviathan. In Jewish mythology, a primordial sea serpent. Source is in pre-biblical Mesopotamian myth. Old Testament Leviathan appears in Psalms as a multi-headed sea serpent that's killed by God and given as food to the Hebrews. In Isaiah, Leviathan is a serpent and a symbol of Israel's enemies who will be slain by God. In Job, it's a sea monster and a symbol of God's power of creation. So let's look at the passage again. So the characters are physically large, but they also have like an interesting moral component. As does Satan being described as, if he's a huge sea creature, how huge is he? He's so huge that the pilot of a boat would deem him or see him as some island who he'd fix his anchor thinking he was like land. I mean, it's crazy. Thus Satan talking to his nearest mate with head uplift above the wave and eyes that sparkling blazed, his other parts besides prone on the flood, extended long and large, lay floating many a rood in bulk as huge as whom the fables name of monstrous size, Titanian or earthborn that warred on Jove, again, warring on God. So these are physically large entities, but there's also a combative element to them. Briareus or Typhon, whom the den by ancient Tarsus held. So these are kind of glossed over as like, yep, they're huge. Or that sea beast Leviathan. And then Milton dedicates all this time to Leviathan and has this long explanation of being confused for an island. So I'm going to ask the next question. So what? So what do these images or similes of Satan tell us or make us feel? So I think literally it's Satan is unimaginably large. Satan is serpentine and can change shape, protean. And most interestingly, Satan is deceptive. I think that's humongously important. Looks like an island, isn't an island, for example, right? So I think we're also learning how the poem behaves. The poem is layered and surprising, kind of like Satan. The poem is also a unique blend of different kinds of universes, classical, Hebraic, and Christian. And man, the poem is always working on us. If there's something that seems irrelevant, look up the words in the line and you're going to realize that Milton is saying something super interesting. Here's an interesting detail, one line. We know the backbeat of blank verse of the poetry, the rhythm that Milton is creating is iambic pentameter. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. Shakespeare's 73rd sonnet, right? That time of year thou mayest in me behold. The one line of Keats's epitaph that he wrote. Here lies one whose name is writ in water. The very first line of pure iambic pentameter in Paradise Lost is this. Oh, how unlike the place from whence they fell. It's fascinating. So that's the backbeat. That's the oh, how unlike the place from whence they fell. We don't get many of these. Milton is like a jazz musician in terms of his uses of rhythmic variation. Why is this the first line of iambic pentameter? I have a theory that's because it's the very first time he references heaven, which is perfection. And when he's referencing heaven for the first time, he uses a rhythmically perfect line of iambic pentameter. I find it brilliant. Okay. If you have to journal or do homework, if you have an aggravating teacher like me who makes you think and write after you read, here are some things that I think are helpful to consider after the first few hundred lines. The top 4 epic similes in Book 1 are there. Satan's body, which we looked at. Satan's shield is compared to the moon that Galileo would see through his telescope. That's a brilliant image. The density of the gathering angels is compared to autumnal leaves, but that metaphor goes in some interesting directions. And then Satan's own glory, he was very luminescent in heaven, and now he's less luminescent, and that's compared to dusk, and that's brilliant. Which is your favorite one and why? 2, kind of open-ended. What stands out to you most about Milton's hell? There's some just literal things that are there that are fascinating, and there's some things that you yourself might notice. 3rd, what is interesting about how Satan tries to inspire the other fallen angels? He's pretty inspirational. Like, he's not a stick figure villain by any means. And lastly, I always want to leave room leave room for you to notice things that I don't notice or that I don't mention because you're not me, and you might pay attention differently to different moments. Um, Keep a journal. Keep track of your thoughts and your questions and your problems. I think that's really helpful. I hope this video is helpful for you, and good luck with your reading.